welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we dig in deep to analyze the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. I'm Andy Nelson from The Next Reel. We are looking at Jon Favreau's 2008 film Iron Man, and closing out the week with me is one last time returning Alex Thompson from the Independence Day Minute. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me back one more time.
One more chance to chat about Tony and, really, Pepper and Obadiah.
Yeah. It's the Pepper and Obi show here. Tony's
Really?
ancillary.
Right.
Now.
We are looking at Iron Man Minute 95. On today's show, the minute starts with Pepper excusing herself from her chat with Obadiah, and it ends with Obadiah glaring menacingly at Pepper as she walks away with Agent Coulson, telling him she's going to give him the meeting of his life. Oh my. I'm excited to talk a little bit more about Agent Coulson and this whole meeting. But before we do, we have to continue closing out this bit of this scene with Pepper and Obadiah. This is a nice little close. We get her covertly pulling the lock chip out of the computer using the copy of the Financial Times that she's conveniently used to kind of cover it up. I was really trying to figure out what issue this was, if this was an actual issue of the Financial Times newspaper, based on the headline that we see, South Korea to revamp rules on overseas investment.
I tried Googling that headline. I got nothing.
Yeah, I did too. And unfortunately, the author's name is just out of focus enough where I never could quite pinpoint exactly who it is. It looks like Anne something.
Yeah. The only thing I could tell is that the copy in the newspaper is, it does appear to be related at least to Korea.
Right. It's not just like the Latin ipsum.
It's not just, Lorem
sort of
ipsum. Or as we noted in one newspaper at the beginning of Cleveland in 6 for an article that was supposedly about the woman who now owns the Indians. It was actually articles about the Cavs-Knicks game the night before.
Whoops.
Yeah. Multiple articles, though. Different articles about the Cavs-Knicks game the night before. One of them was about Larry Nance. One of them was about Ron Harper.
Oh, that's funny.
In that case, someone just grabbed the newspaper and just photoshopped out one headline for another.
Right. Just put a different headline in.
Yeah.
Well, it makes me wonder, because obviously it's much easier these days to, you can pretty much construct an entire newspaper very easily. But this film has very much been grounding us in real world publications. Even Christine, who in the comics works for the Daily Bugle, does not in this film. She's Vanity Fair. And so it's very much working to kind of create this very real sense of this world. This is not this fictional Marvel universe, on Earth 616. This is very much a film universe that feels very much like our own world. And so seeing the Financial Times here, it feels very authentic to have this as something that would pop up in Tony's office.
And that's actually, it's something that is kind of one of my few complaints about the MCU as it's progressed. They made such an effort here in the first one to really make this feel like it's part of the real world. But it is sort of the inevitability, as you've got these people with fantastic powers and abilities and technologies, that it's going to diverge farther and farther from our world. You think about where the MCU is now, 19, 20 years later, and, James Rhodes can basically walk despite being paralyzed because future technology is super fantastic, or because the technology is so fantastic. Tony Stark is healing himself with nanobots, It is a divergence that we're starting to get as you just go farther and farther into the comic universe. And as you start to sort of realistically extrapolate that stuff, you start to go, well, people's lives should be a lot better with all this technology out there. But at this point in time, it's still, we're still pretty grounded. We still don't know the full scope of what this universe has in it.
Right. And that's actually a really interesting point. And I suppose you could look at it like, okay, part of that is up until 2008, it's a pretty, or retroactively, since they've named this movie coming out taking place in 2010. So we'd say 2010, realistically, everything is flowing pretty normally the way that it was beforehand. I mean, yes.
Yeah, other than Captain America's involvement in
World War II.
Is Captain Marvel set before this?
Captain Marvel is in the 90s. So we have that. And then we also have Hank Pym, back doing his original Ant-Man stuff during the the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there are hints of these things that have been happening all this time, but it's always treated as, confidential government stuff that there's probably conspiracy theorists out there who think that things are happening, but nothing has quite blown up to the extent that it will later. I guess you could argue by the end of this movie when Tony Stark, with his big reveal and kind of the way that shifts people's thinking.
Yeah, like I'm fine with, like, for example, the idea that there is some futuristic shrinking technology that was used to solve problems during the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that, and that technology is basically kept locked away. I'm okay with that, but when you start to pile all these different technologies on each other, like that exists, the super soldier serum exists, the Iron Man technology, the repulsor technology, and the arc reactor technology. The Iron Man universe is essentially a universe where they've got clean, renewable energy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of future tech that's got to be involved, that would be invented for all of these things.
Well, yeah. And I mean, Obadiah is great to provide a very dismissive line that allows us to write a lot of that off earlier in the film when he's just when they're talking about the arc reactor, and he's just like, that's just something we built to shut the hippies up. It sounds like something that they really haven't done anything to use because it's not a weapon, and they haven't found a way to weaponize it yet.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's my sense of it, but it is a pretty interesting way to kind of look at this. And I think some of it you could argue perhaps it's because by the end of this film, Tony is going to divulge, I'm Iron Man, basically saying, hey, superheroes exist and I'm one of them, is kind of almost one way you could look at that line. But also it's a shift that he's having here with his company, theoretically, where the company is going to stop making weapons and he's going to shift his focus. And so I guess you could maybe argue, hey, now he's shifting his focus to creating new technologies so that people who are paralyzed can walk and things like that. Although to that end, I feel like if he really is shifting his focus to that great of an extent, that we would see throughout the universe that there are other people who have been paralyzed who now are also walking.
Yeah, that's the thing is you would think, like with Hank Pym's shrinking and growing technology, you could solve world hunger in an instant, right?
Yeah.
Just take a foodstuff, make it the size of a house. Congratulations, we just fed a village.
Yeah, right. Well, that's something that I think I saw a post or a comic actually about this, about how these superheroes who are filthy rich, like Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne, who are investing all of their funds in creating all these super suits and things like that to go fight bad guys and stuff. But are they putting any of their money toward, world hunger and to investing in schools and things like that? It's like, it doesn't feel like something that makes a lot of sense to explore heavily in these films, but it would be nice to know that there's a Tony Stark Foundation that he does start that is funding a lot of this sort of stuff. And he's actually, obviously the story's not focusing on it, but hey, yes, he is also creating all these school programs and he's doing all these other things.
I think we do get a little bit of that in...
Well, we have the firefighter fundraiser earlier in the film, I guess.
Well, we do also get a little bit of that even later in the MCU. I want to say it's Civil War. It's Civil War, where we're introduced to Tony. Basically, he is giving a talk at MIT, and he basically tells all the geniuses at MIT, "Your research is funded. Go out there and change the world."
Yep. True.
So, I mean, they're doing some of that, but it's the issue when you're trying to apply fantastical sci-fi technologies to, at some point, the world is getting farther and farther divergent from our world that they're talking about.
Yeah, and also it gets to a point where, these guys also just need to tell a story. It needs to fit in context of this 2-hour time frame, and we just need to focus on the point that is going to get across with this plot and this story with these themes. you don't want to start dwelling on every single thing that these people are doing, because then it's just you're no longer making a movie. You're creating like a Ken Burns bio special on who this Tony Stark is.
Yeah, if you were doing a 10-season, television series, you could have an episode that focuses on the ramifications of, the shrinking tech and the growing tech and things like that. But when you're just trying to make a 2-hour movie,
right. Yeah, sure. And I mean, we'll save more of that for when we get to Ant-Man as far as the shrinking and growing tech. Yeah. But in context of what's going on here, I think we have this closing of this scene with Pepper, who is getting away from Obadiah, who is suspicious of her. And do you think that he's really wanting this newspaper, or do you think that he realized she hid something in it?
I think he suspects. As we're talking about this over the past 4 minutes, I am starting to lean towards he got that notification that they tried to use his credentials in Tony's office. So he's now suspicious of her. So maybe he heard the sound of something happening when she was picking up the paper or something like that.
I mean, I like it. Financial Times does actually have a crossword puzzle. I wasn't sure in a financial newspaper, but they do. He asks for it for the puzzle. And so, I mean, it makes sense. But again, it could be nice subtext to just kind of have that last moment with her just to check, and see if there's one last opportunity he has to catch her in the act, then he's going to take it.
Yeah, because I mean, if he doesn't say that, it certainly doesn't diminish from her activity at all. The fact that she, stealthily snuck the thumb drive out of there in a newspaper. Yeah. It just, I think it's him trying to catch her, doing something there.
Right.
I think he knows she did something suspicious with the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I love the way that they lit his face when, the look on his face as she's walking away and he says, "Is that today's paper?" It's, it's about 9 seconds into this minute. It just like he's got this great light hitting his face, like at his eyes and lower, that just I don't know. It looks really nice. It works well for kind of that sense.
And looking at that shot, I think that shot supports the idea that he knows she's up to something. It's the sort of a villainous, I'm not even going to look at you while I say this sort of a thing,
Right.
If it was a sincere, I want to do the puzzle that's in that paper, I think he would have turned to her to ask about it. But
yes. Yeah. No, it works. It's a great villainous look. And that's, why it looks so nice the way he's lit and the way that he says it. Just like, just creepy. And then she takes it and she's on her way. And this is that final little bit as she walks out, the camera tracks with her and she looks at her lock chip. But then we get Obadiah turning around as soon as she's off to the elevator, slamming that paper down and circling around to the computer to check and see what's going on.
Yeah.
And we get that download complete notification and that great reaction he has of kind of throwing himself backward in the chair, running his hands across his bald head and getting up to go after her. It's it just works so nicely here.
So I do a couple of brief notes here because we're about to see, other than the last shot from overhead, we're about to see our last of Obadiah in this minute.
Yeah.
So one, I do notice he has, I guess it's got to be a practiced move when you wear a suit every day. When he stands up, he buttons his suit jacket back up.
Right.
Like that's got to be a practiced move. Like I feel like when women who wear, business skirts, that but almost reflexively, they sit down, cross their legs, and then slide the skirt back more towards their knees. It's like, I've been doing this for 20, 30 years. This is the move that you do when you sit down.
Yeah. And I feel like that is very true. I mean, that's, I feel like I always do that when I'm wearing a suit jacket. I'll always end up, buttoning it back up. So
it's like I stand up, I button, I sit down, I unbutton.
Yeah. Right. It's so practiced the way he does it. It's so nice. And also, for a guy who's been so patient, the way that he's been moving through this, he's been so slow and deliberate in every action and move that he's been doing, whether it's pouring the drink or walking over to her to give her the drink or everything. It's nice, the shift in his demeanor. Like once she's no longer watching him, or he feels like it's ready for him to figure stuff out, like he just moves to that desk real quick. Like he turns and he's just so focused now and angry. Everything is shifted from that kind of more protected veneer where he's not being as obvious, and now he's moving fast and deliberate.
Yeah. And another appearance thing I just want to call out, as someone who did the shaved head with beard look for a year of my life, he has chosen kind of the hardest way to do that, where the beard trails off to a point where it almost goes behind the ear. That takes daily upkeep. Either he is maintaining that daily or he's going to a barber daily.
Yeah. Somebody else mentioned that on a previous minute where, it almost is like, it's almost designed to look like that fake beard where it's got like the little hook over your ears to kind of hold it in place. It is a complicated look.
You have not made your life simple. Just have it, just cut it off. Well. Just cut it off right at the... Pick a horizontal line and stop hair there. Yeah, right.
But boy, it works well for Obadiah. Oh, yeah. It's a great look.
It does.
Yeah. We go from that to Pepper fleeing, I guess you could say. She's in trying to get away as quickly as she can. And it's interesting because she took the elevator to get out of here. But, well, we assume she did. She was heading back to the direction of the elevator. We never actually see her get on. But now we see her on the stairs. And it makes me wonder, why didn't she just take the elevator all the way down? But maybe it's one of those elevators that only goes to the second floor.
Yeah, I was going to say, I work, I won't mention the name, but I work for a large company. And one of our main buildings is about 10, 15 minutes away from my house. And in the main corporate center, there's about 2 or 3 floors of escalators. And then from that second or third floor, you take the elevators up to the offices. So, in this main lobby thing, and in those first 2 or 3 floors, there are a lot of things. There are shops, there are bank branches, it's almost like a little mini mall, and then up above the mall are the corporate offices.
So it's right.
So this central thing here, this could be a couple floors of Stark stuff. It could also be a couple floors of shops which frequently will be frequented by a lot of Stark employees. I mean, essentially you could have food court up there. The second floor of this building could be the food court is certainly a possibility.
That would make sense. I can see that playing out like that, where it could have a setup very similar to that. That allows for. I mean, I don't think that it's one of those buildings where there are multiple businesses in it. It's it's pretty clear that this entire complex is. Yeah,
this is a Stark campus. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So to that end, I don't think there are other businesses in here. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, in a different universe, there would be like a Starbucks in here or something like that, where they have those things, or the little restaurant where the employees can go grab a bite, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, if there are little business there, they are things like that. It is almost a food court type of thing. Might be a mini Starbucks, like not a full service. Sit down and have coffee for 4 hours. But if what you really want is a venti white grande mocha, if that's the coffee that gets you through your day, you can go down to the second floor commissary and get it.
Right, exactly. So we go from this little, Pepper on the move, and then Obadiah kind of, I guess you could say, in hot pursuit once he realizes what she had been up to. And now we're back in kind of, I guess it's kind of that ground floor lobby area. And this is where we have Agent Coulson returning. And this is where we have this time dilemma still. And again, I think we've determined the only way that this makes any sense is that they did end up setting up their own meeting that does not happen to coincide with the meeting that Tony set up with Coulson for the 24th at 7 p.m. because it just doesn't make any sense right now. And also, this is where we see a good number of other people wandering around the office, and it makes me feel like maybe it's not a Saturday, because these all look like business people, not people who are just in to get a few things done on Saturday in their casual clothes.
Yeah. It might still be, it might still be just because this is still a really quiet lobby.
It's quiet. We've got one guy who's walking around with his briefcase. We have a guy in the distance who's just standing there, kind of staring out the window. We've got, as the camera pans over, or kind of dollies over to reveal Coulson, we see a couple people walking around outside. And as the camera tilts up to see Obadiah, we have a person walking past him. There's a woman who walks by.
Yeah, it's a quiet lobby for 2 p.m. on a business day.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. But again, it depends on which part of the lobby this is. I mean, there are a lot of questions, like you said, like with these type of lobbies that might have lots of different staircases and escalators and things like that. Who knows what part of it we're looking at here.
It is a little bit of a weird architecture that I feel like it's possible to get a little turned around in. You got the staircase that goes down, and then a crosswalk, but then a different, like a banister. The banister that Obadiah, or the overhang that Obadiah is standing on, is not connected to the staircase that Pepper just came down from. Right.
It's like a little catwalk that goes across. Like it's almost like a mall.
Obadiah's catwalk is not connected to the catwalk that Pepper came down from. Obadiah's catwalk is connected to a staircase that goes to the floor above him.
Yeah. Right.
But it's a weird kind of architecture.
Yeah, it is kind of funky the way that it's all laid out here, but it doesn't look like, well, at least from here, it looks like you've got the staircase going up from where he is. But I don't feel like there's much above that either.
Yeah.
But I can't. But again, going back to those images that we were looking at earlier in the week of the exterior of this property, it's not like a high rise anyway. No. It's, Stark Industries is probably
6 or 7,
6, maybe 7 flights high, and that's it. So, so I guess to that end, it's fine. It works in context of what we're seeing here. Yeah. And again, that makes me also feel like they probably were filming it in this location rather than building a set.
Oh yeah, I absolutely believe this was filmed at a location. And the fact that the Starks, because I assume this was being built, this didn't start getting built with Tony, that this would have been built at some point during Howard's tenure. They're a little vain, so I could see them going with a geometry and a layout of a building that's maybe a little more form than function. The fact that if you were going from the 3rd floor down to the 1st, you have to take the stairs that are behind Obi, then get off that catwalk, then walk over to another catwalk to take the stairs that Pepper took down. Yeah, it's a little bit of a clunky function, but I could see that the Starks are that kind of vein that they would go with something that's pretty more so than something that works great.
Yeah, it's kind of odd the way that it all lays out, but that I agree with you. It does feel like they are the type of people, especially if you look at his house. I mean, that also has that sense where it's just kind of this nebulous space of these curved rooms and everything kind of winding around each other, and it often,
like you said, the
like
amount of digging he would be doing into the floor, there should be no foundation left.
Yeah, exactly. I also really like as we tilt up, I know this is the very, very end of the minute, but as we tilt up to see Obadiah standing there on that catwalk staring at Pepper, that fantastic glass right next to where he is, you get that reflection of him, which I think just works really nicely with the kind of the duplicitousness of him that we have.
Yeah. It's got a nice the split between the 2 panes kind of fractures his face. It's a nice bit of cinematography there.
Yeah, really, really nicely set up. Which also, just as a side note, also there was another fantastic Jeff Bridges film, The Fisher King, that he did with Robin Williams, and they did a nice effect of that with Robin Williams's face, where as his brain is kind of all of a sudden he's having those flashbacks to the awful stuff that had happened in his life. The same thing happens as the camera pans across his face through beveled glass, and his face starts splitting and everything, and it's a really nicely done moment that I just thought of because of that. So
yeah, and there's one last thing I noticed here that really rings true to me as someone who works, in big corporate buildings is that I noticed Pepper's little ID badge on her hip. Just a nice touch that everyone's got to wear those frickin' things to get into this room and that room and so on.
Except for Obadiah.
Well, I mean, his could be underneath his jacket, I suppose. I actually don't know if our company's like high CEOs like have one of those on their hip or not.
Well, he did have one, and actually I'd have to go back to probably around minute 46 or so when after the press conference he goes to talk to Tony at the arc reactor, and he does actually pull out his ID badge and swipe it so that he can access the arc reactor room. Yeah, and I guess it is a little reflective of how all the characters sort of are. Obadiah has his put away so that he can, look good in his suit. Pepper has hers on her hip because that is the easiest place for it to be, because it's got one of those extender lanyards that you just reach out, grab it off your hip and swipe it. And then Coulson has his kind of awkwardly stuck onto his shirt. Yeah, just kind of pinned on because he doesn't want to have to deal with it. But yeah. Okay, so I'm looking back. It's minute 47. And sure enough, we don't see Obadiah with it. He reaches into his inside coat pocket to pull his card out. So that's where he keeps it. There you go. Yep. People recognize him. He doesn't need to have it on his hip like everyone else. Yeah. And like I said, it's some of the vanity or the appearance. It detracts from the look of her in her business suit that she's got a little badge thingy on her hip, but that's the most practical place to put one. So, she's very practical in that way. And then we finally get, as we've said, Coulson. We get that meeting that's getting set up. There's something about the way that Clark Gregg just continues to play this character, and I love the way that it throughout the film it has seemed like it's this joke, right? This whole idea of I'd like to have a meeting. Okay, we'll get it set up. I'd like to have a meeting. Okay, we'll get it set up. It's like this running joke throughout that's been getting set up over and over again, and I like that. Weirdly, it worked out perfectly to all of a sudden pay off right here. And I wasn't expecting it at all. And I know when I first saw this, I was like, that was just genius to kind of bring him back in here as part of this this payoff for this moment here. Especially when I first saw this, I had no context of S.H.I.E.L.D. or who he was. And so it was a payoff that I wasn't expecting, but I ended up really enjoying it. Yeah. I don't think I have anything else for this. What about you? I just noticed while I'm scrubbing through this one last thing, going back to Obi in the office when he's rubbing his head, and it's kind of further confounding the idea of the time of day. If you look out in the parking lot behind him, there are a ton of empty spaces for regular business hours. Yes, there are. So that's leading me to believe that this might be a weekend. All right. Well, I think it's a good thing to continue to go with, even though it's and it makes sense. I mean, it's probably a big company. There probably are still plenty of people coming in and working. Probably on the people weekends. There working, but you wouldn't have that many empty spaces at 2 on a weekday. Yeah. But right. I guess we're doing our best to try to we're doing our best to take things and fit them together where no one was putting that much thought into it. So exactly. Well, Alex, we like to, as we close out our weeks with our guests, talk to them a little bit about their Marvel backgrounds and their favorites. So what were you familiar with Iron Man when you came into this franchise? Were you a comic book reader? What's your backstory? I was a big, so my 2 biggest comic book franchises were Batman and X-Men. Okay. And then dipping into both worlds there. Yeah. And then I sort of got familiar with all the other characters through those. So like, I know there was, I think there was an X-Men VHS for a series that basically they never wound up picking up, but they basically had the pilot and they released it on a VHS. And as almost like a B-side on the VHS, they had an episode of, I want to say, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. So Spider-Man and
Iceman and
some
woman, I'll say Firestar or something like that.
That was the best show.
Living in his house. And that particular episode, I think the Beetle was stealing a power device from Tony Stark. So that, I think, was actually my first exposure at all to Iron Man. He was Tony Stark, and he had some power device that the Beetle was stealing. I don't even remember if they mentioned the fact that he was Iron Man in that episode.
How funny.
But I was not well versed in Iron Man until after this movie came out. The MCU, Marvel had already optioned off most of their biggest cash cow, all the ones that I would have had prior exposure to,
like Hulk and Spider-Man.
Yeah, Hulk, Spider-Man, X-Men, etc. Before they started the MCU, so they were kind of working with a little. I hate to say that Iron Man and Captain America are the B team now, but they were kind of the B team already at that point in time. So I didn't know. I knew Iron Man was Tony Stark. I knew he had, power armor. That's about all I knew. I think I was familiar with the Demon in a Bottle storyline a little bit. Okay. I think I knew the Mandarin. I knew a couple of villain names, but Obadiah Stane was a new name to me. Pepper Potts, Happy Hogan, Ivan Vanko. All of those names were foreign to me at the time. I was very well versed in the couple franchises I knew and very casual about the ones I didn't. So it was a lot of, I know they take liberty with a little bit of the canon here and there in this first movie, but it didn't bother me that much because, I didn't know that part of the canon. So
yeah, it's interesting the way that, that they took this character that wasn't as largely known. I mean, obviously Spider-Man was a huge success at the box office and very popular, and X-Men was doing really well as well. And obviously DC had its own films, but Iron Man seemed like a choice that was a little strange, but they proved any doubters wrong, because it sure exploded and took off quite nicely. So of the 20, well, technically we are recording this the day after Captain Marvel opened, but I know you haven't seen it yet. But of the 20 films before Captain Marvel, I don't want you to necessarily feel like you have to rank all 20, but what would you say are your tops? Like, do you have a top 5 of the MCU?
In no particular order, because I'd have to find my phone. I probably have the order on there somewhere. I'd probably say Thor Ragnarok, the 2 Guardians movies, probably the first Iron Man, and maybe either Civil War, Winter Soldier. I can't decide between those 2. With a special soft place in my heart for Infinity War, just because that's how I would have played with my toys. Is just take all the toys and throw them at each other. But I mean, I look at like Ragnarok and the Guardians movies, and that's everything that I would be looking for if I'm going to a movie with superheroes in it. Is, what? I'm just going to have a ton of fun for 2 hours. And things like Civil War and Winter Soldier are a different type of movie-going experience, and that's also cool. But, that's... things like Ragnarok and stuff like that are sit back and just have fun for 2 hours. And
right. Yeah. It's a very fun takes on the universe. And I think it makes it easy to just enjoy and not have to feel like it's a deeper thing or anything. It's just something to have fun with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, Ragnarok finally made a meal out of the thing that the first 2 Thor movies and the Avengers to a lesser extent had sort of just been snacking around. The idea of getting comedy out of this big pompous buffoon that is Thor. Joss Whedon said on the Avengers commentary that he just loves to knock Asgardians out of frame. And I mean, the amount of most of the first Thor is big, pompous, buffoonish Asgardian Thor in regular world with, sort of sitcom characters, Darcy and Selvig and Jane are just, regular folk.
Yeah, right. And obviously they've designed that film to really play around with that, which is, it's fun. Yeah. I mean, I like what they actually did with that. It was a fun way to take a character who is so arrogant and pompous and just do some fun stuff with him.
Yeah, and I do have to probably throw the first Iron Man in there because in the sort of the top, because that is it starts the world building, and it is a statement of intent, I think, for the entire MCU, that we're taking them seriously, but we're not taking them as, I don't want to say as seriously as like Christopher Nolan, but we're not treating them gravely, but we're treating these as seriously as other people treat action movies, as seriously as they were treating Die Hard when they were making it. That's how seriously we're treating this.
Yeah. I mean, you have to treat the characters with respect, and you have to treat them like they're real characters.
Yes, with respect. I think that's a good way of putting it, because I feel like when they're doing, I'm sure they, were trying when they made these movies, but when you look at like Daredevil, you go like, there are times where you feel like they weren't, how much did they care here, right? Like,
well, yeah, because it's like, what was the sense that a comic book movie needed to be? Like, I feel like they figured it out with Spider-Man and the X-Men films and the Batman films. Well, the later Batman films, I would argue that starting with the Batman or with the Dark Knight, even Batman Begins, they were figuring that out. But if you go back to the Tim Burton and subsequent Batman films,
Burton Schumacher,
they were really more Schumacher, but certainly a lot more camp, going back to almost the old TV
Burton's
show.
Plenty camp. People don't realize it because the camp is also Burton, Gothica,
true.
But it's still plenty campy. He had armies of mind-controlled penguins roaming around.
That's true. That is very true. Very true. Yeah. No, but I do think that they these films ended up just, they found a way to ground it while allowing for kind of the respect for these characters and just a sense to kind of, I don't know, just allow for still a level of enjoyability that, I feel like the DC films, they went on the Batman dark train and kind of just went way too dark for a good chunk of time that I don't think necessarily was helpful.
Yeah. I mean, well, with Batman, I think to some extent there is a bit of trying to either recoil against the overly camp of the, Batman 66 and then Burton and Schumacher, and then, trying to strike that balance. The fact that then they made Superman dark is inexcusable to me. But I think Batman, you're because Batman is kind of dark.
Oh yeah.
You've got to find the way to have some darkness without it becoming too grim, which is always the balancing act with a Batman story.
Well, and I think that's something that I don't know. I feel like the DC universe was trying to figure out how to do that. Like, the Batman films worked so great because it was this dark world and gritty, and let's kind of keep it going that route, without remembering that, we have, if you take characters in our own world right now, you have darker stories, you have lighter stories, you have funnier stories, you have more serious stories. Yeah. They're all blending together. And I feel like the DC films kind of went off on, let's make them all dark now, when they didn't need to. They could have done some dark, but allowed for that more positive sort of storytelling that you should have had in the Superman film. Yeah,
I think that's the thing that gives me hope for the sort of soft reboot that they're doing now with the DC cinematic, with Wonder Woman and with Aquaman, that they're remembering first and foremost, I want to go to the movie and have fun watching it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Even Shazam. I mean, that looks like crazy fun.
Yeah, that looks like it's in a similar vein to Ragnarok and Guardians. And I think that's where the Marvel's universe started from, is let's have fun, get invested in the characters, and then we can tell serious stories involving the characters.
Right.
That people now care about.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think Infinity War works so well, because people were very invested in these characters, and it gave us a place to come into that film and have our hearts broken because we were so in love with these characters by that point. Yeah, by the time that Spoiler Alert dies, I'm invested in Spoiler Alert, and I like Spoiler Alert. Yeah. Spoiler Alert City, yes. Yeah. Rest in peace, Spoiler Alert. All right. Well, let's wrap it up and put a cap on this week. Do you want to remind everybody where they can find you one last time?
Yeah, check me out on your podcatcher of choice on Independence Day Minute, Galaxy Quest Minute, Cleveland and Six going deep into Major League, guesting on most other Movies by Minutes podcasts, and the previous 4 episodes of this podcast.
Those two. Hopefully you've heard those by the time you got to this one, but
yes.
If not,
you
check them out.
Jump in on minute 95. That's a strange way to handle it.
Right. Right. Well, thanks again so much, Alex. I appreciate you joining me all day.
Yeah, sure.
It's been great.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, that is it for today's show. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the show for free at marvelmovieminute.com. Join us over in our Discord chat room and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Next Reel. And if you like what we do and you want to support us and get some cool stuff, become a patron over at thenextreel.com/Patreon. Until next time, true believers.